All right, let's get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Caitlin Dunkley, and I'm the Director of Organizing at the Transformative In-Prison Workgroup, what we call the TPW. It's great to see so many familiar faces and so many new faces. We have lots of TPW member organizations with us today, and we have new folks too who are joining us for this training on trauma-informed facilitation in women's prisons. I'm going to say a few words about the TPW and about what you can expect during this training. And we're really thrilled that y'all are going to spend this morning and or this afternoon, depending on where you live, with us. The Transformative In-Prison Workgroup, or the TPW, is a network and a coalition of community-based organizations that provide in-prison healing or transformative programs. Those programs really range. So there's arts programs, higher ed programs, restorative and transformative justice programs, puppies behind bars programs, a whole range of programs that are humanizing to people who are living in prison and who respect and uphold the dignity of all people. The TPW is on a mission to ensure that all people living in state prisons in California and New York have access to meaningful in-prison programming. And we have a North Star goal of decarceration. We are particularly thrilled to host today's training. The TPW's Women's Committee has put together this training over the last few months, and we're really excited to have 5 panelists: Miss Betty McKay from SE Justice Group, Tarivia Williams from Healing Dialogue and Action, Michelle Mondia from Insight Garden Program, Tai Griffith from Justice Education at the Claremont Colleges, Stephanie Covington from the Center for Gender and Justice. And as you all know, because this has been a Zoom kind of couple of years, we want to also thank Carly Gabby, who is helping us make sure all the behind the scenes technical stuff goes off without a hitch. Thank you, Carly. What we're going to hear about today is overview of data related to incarceration and women. We're going to dive into intersectionality and what that has to do with trauma. We'll do a Trauma 101 refresher. We'll hear directly from people who've been incarcerated about their experiences inside of witnessing trauma. We'll do a skills refresher. And we'll end by talking about vicarious trauma and how you all can take care of yourselves in your role as facilitators. Before we get started, a couple pieces. We are talking about trauma today. And so I want everyone to be aware that there may be some content areas that we talk about that are activating or triggering. We ask you to take care of yourselves. If you have to step away or close the screen, please do. We are including these pieces for the purpose of learning together and for training, and have been intentional about what we have chosen to include. And we also want you to be able to see our faces. So we're going to have about half the presentation is going to have slides and about half the presentation isn't. But if most folks are very familiar with this with Zoom. But for people who aren't, there's a way to increase the size of people's faces and decrease the size of the slide itself by dragging this little bar in the middle of the screen back and forth. So if you want to see more people, go ahead and drag that so that you're shrinking the size of the slide. And finally, before we get started, I'd like to just have us have a brief moment of grounding. And we're going to do what's known as a 4-count breath or a box breath. And so I encourage you to just get comfortable where you are in your seat or if you're standing. And what we're going to do is in through the nose, 4 counts, hold at the top for 4 counts, exhale for 4 counts through the mouth, hold at the bottom for 4 counts. So I'll lead the first, and then I'll ask you to do 2 more at your own pace. Folks ready? All right, great. We're going to go in through the nose. 3, 2, 1. Hold at the top. 3, 2, 1. Exhale through the mouth. 3, 2, 1. Hold at the bottom. 3, 2, 1. Twice more at your own pace. In through the nose for 4 counts. Hold at the top for 4 counts. Exhale through the mouth for 4 counts. Hold at the bottom for 4 counts. And one final practice. Terrific. Welcome everyone to our refresher course. I'm going to start things off by passing to Miss Betty McKay from SE Justice Group.
Good morning / afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you for being present. I would like to bring consciousness to language. And we don't often really think about how language falls upon the body or how it affects someone traumatized. So let's just for 1 second think about, I want you to imagine some rocks in your hand. So just imagine some rocks in your hand. And the importance of human-centered language is so important to those that we serve because language lands on their body like we're throwing these rocks at them. So when you say inmate, convict, offender, just imagine that rock landing on them versus incarcerated person, loved one, or even simply just calling them by their name or referring to them by their name. Inmate, the system changed the terminology from inmate to offender. That was just to hold a little better, to hold them more accountable to judgment and hurt and harm. So just think about the words. You know, we used to say sticks and stones may hurt us, but words will never hurt us. Words do hurt. Words do hurt. And we just need to bring that to our consciousness. What's the language? Just for instance, I think it was Dr. Stephanie that said it. What's wrong with you versus what happened to you? Now, how differently did that sound to you? How differently did that feel on your body? So I just want to just ask us all to be conscious of language. I think Carly's going to drop if you just want to look at some of the language and just contemplate it, we're dropping in the Berkeley's dictionary, the Unscholarly Dictionary, so that you could just look at some of it just to get some ideas. But you can feel it on yourself. So how does it feel on a traumatized person that we serve? So I just want to just really just ask us to be conscious of that. And now I'm going to pass it to Tai.
Thank you so much for that, Miss Betty. Appreciate it. Hello, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Hopefully you all can see it. All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Tai Griffith, and I'm a member of the TPW leadership team. I'm also the manager for justice education at the Claremont Colleges, as well as a facilitator with the Prison Education Project. I've had the privilege to teach in over 6 adult facilities and several juvenile facilities, and I've also taught internationally. I've also been a part of the justice system as a teenager, a pregnant teenager in Los Padrinos juvenile facility. And in my experience, I can tell you that trauma can be triggered at any time and in any space. It could happen in a forgiveness and healing class. It could happen in a career development workshop. It could even happen in a political science class. It's important, as Miss Betty said, to be very intentional about our words and the phrases we use. We know that words have had, the power to damage people, disempower them, hurt them, and further traumatize the human spirit. But we also know that words have the power to uplift, to empower, and to encourage the human spirit. I will spend the next few minutes providing a brief data overview of girls and women in carceral facilities. But first, I want to talk a little bit about trauma intersectionality. So trauma does not occur in a vacuum, as we all know. It occurs within personal, social, and often political contexts of a person and their intersecting identities, which can include race, class, ability, gender identity and expression, first language, sexual orientation, religion, immigration status, body size, etc. Trauma is experienced at these intersections. Both victimization and oppression can have a traumatic impact. How a person moves through the world, how they are treated, the messages they receive, and their history, especially when it includes oppression and marginalization, all matter. Intersectionality is the social, personal, and often political context where people experience trauma. So let's look a little bit at the growth in female incarceration rates. So over the last several decades, women and girls have become a more visible presence in our criminal legal system. Women and girls have become the fastest growing segment of the incarcerated population. It is extremely important that we understand their experiences within it to better meet their needs. While some correctional facilities have increasingly adopted gender responsive policies and programs, there have been very little virtually concerted efforts to create and implement trauma-informed and gender responsive practices. Women's incarceration rates have grown at twice the pace of men's incarceration rates in recent decades, and much of the growth has been disproportionately located in local jails. In 35 states, women's population numbers have fared worse than men's, and in a few extraordinary states, women's prison populations have even grown enough to counteract the reductions in men's populations. So when looking at annual arrest rates and trends for men and women, across the country, there is a disturbing gender disparity in recent carceral population trends. While recent reforms have reduced the total number of people in carceral facilities since 2009, almost all of these decreases have been among men. Nationwide, women's state prison population grew 834% over nearly 40 years. That's more than double the pace of the growth among men. And as you can see, the arrest rates of men have consistently gone down over the last 40 years, while the arrest rates of women have consistently gone up over the last 40 years. When looking at carceral institutions and offenses, there are a few important differences between men's and women's national incarceration patterns over time. For example, jails play a particularly significant role in women's incarceration. There are over 231,000 women incarcerated in the United States. The number of women in California prisons have increased more than sixfold, from 847 in 1978 to over 8,000 in 2020. The number of women in California jails have increased more than fivefold, from 1,725 in 1970 to now over 10,000. In stark contrast to the total incarcerated population, where the state prison system holds twice as many people than local jails, most incarcerated women are held in jails and not state prisons. When examining the demographic breakdowns of women in carceral facilities, we see that Black women and Native American women are significantly overrepresented in prisons and jails. And we do have that demographic breakdown there. Now, I know that we have all heard of the school to prison pipeline, but have you ever heard of the sexual abuse to prison pipeline? This is the girls' story. Violence against girls is a crisis of national proportions that cuts across every divide of race, class, and ethnicity. It is painfully a tale of America. And in a perverse twist of justice, many girls who experience sexual abuse are routed into the juvenile justice system. because of the violence they've experienced. So indeed, sexual abuse is one of the primary predictors of girls' entry into the juvenile justice system. The sexual abuse to prison pipeline is a girl's story. Evidence suggests that there is a significant cause of girls' rates of arrest and detention is aggressive enforcement of non-serious offenses that are rooted in the experience of abuse and trauma, which I know firsthand. The leading cause of arrest for girls are minor offenses such as misdemeanors, status offenses, outstanding warrants, and technical violations. And the decision to arrest and detain girls in these cases is often in part of that perception of girls having violated some type of conventional norm, a stereotype of feminine behavior, even when that behavior is caused by trauma. Of the girls confined in youth facilities, nearly 10% are held for status offenses. These include running away, truancy, and incorrigibility. When we're looking at boys, such offenses account for less than 3%. As is in the case with women, girls of color and those who identify as LGBTQ are disproportionately confined in juvenile facilities. Black girls account for 35% of the confined population. Latinas account for 19%, and white girls account for 38%. Now, while the LGBTQ women are disproportionately represented in the adult corrections facility, a staggering 40% of girls in the juvenile system identify as lesbian, bisexual, questioning, or gender nonconforming. The sexual abuse to prison pipeline. Extensive research on female jail and prison populations in the United States indicates an overwhelming prevalence, between 77% and 90% of incarcerated women have had childhood exposure to traumatic events. Between 59% and 90% of incarcerated women also report continued patterns of physical and sexual abuse at the hands of intimate partners, both in adolescent and adult relationships. A study compared the occurrence of adverse childhood events reported by incarcerated men and women and found that women had significantly greater exposure to childhood traumatic events than men did. This oversight has serious consequences. Rates of sexual and physical abuse are high among justice-involved women. Estimates range from half to over 90% and are much higher than reported amongst men. And then we can't forget the fact that almost a third of women in jail have a current serious mental illness, which is over twice the rate among men in jail. With 12 million women per year experiencing police-initiated contacts, many of which involve searches, use of force, and other traumatizing experiences, it is important, extremely important, that we be able as facilitators in these spaces to recognize and respond to the intersectionality of trauma. Thank you so much for your time. And at this point, I would like to pass to my colleague, Michelle.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning. Just checking to see that my slides are coming through. Yeah, okay, great. Let me just go over to, sorry about that. My very first slide. Oh, I think it stopped sharing.
It did stop sharing, but we have time to pull it back up.
Okay, give me one sec.
Well, Michelle's pulling that up. How's everybody doing? Yeah, all right, great. Thank you, Tai, for that terrific presentation.
Looks good?
Looks great.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle Mundia. I'm the program manager for Insight Garden program. And our mission is to connect program participants to self, community, and nature. We also have a very robust re-entry program. And I think our long-term goal is to have gardens across the United States. We are currently in 11 prisons in the state of California. I'm here to expand on what our colleague Tayi just shared on intersectionality. A bit of background: it was first coined by Professor Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989. Intersectionality is the acknowledgement that everyone has their own unique experiences of discrimination and oppression, and that we must consider everything and anything that can marginalize people: gender, race, class, sexual orientation, physical ability, etc. In essence, all forms of systemic oppression are inextricably linked. More importantly, it is a lens through which you can see where power comes and where power collides. And now the question is, how does this lens shape our work as program providers and facilitators? Let me share some quick data with you all. 84% of girls in juvenile detention have experienced family violence. 25% of Latinx immigrant trans women surveyed in LA, a majority of whom are undocumented, reported sexual assault by law enforcement agents. As many as 94% of some of women's prisons populations have a history of physical or sexual abuse after being incarcerated. 47% among Black transgender people have been incarcerated at some point. And 324,000 each year of pregnant women are physically or sexually assaulted by an intimate partner. And just to point these out, these statistics are before folks even enter the carceral system. And right, this is another way to look at this, wherein 13.2% of the US population identifies as Black or African American. Of those, 16% have a diagnosable mental illness in the past year, and that's over 6.8 million people. More people than the population of Chicago, Houston, and Philadelphia combined. And I just wanted to provide another example of how intersectionality as a lens play itself in forms of systemic oppression and how it shows up for Asian American Pacific Islander, AAPI women, for instance. It would be in their experience, for example, for us to look at systems of immigration, deportation, refugee, model minority myth, and or sexual trauma for being fetishized. Asian women are stereotyped as simultaneously submissive and dangerous. How would an understanding of these systems, right? Because they are, as I mentioned, and as Tayi mentioned, these are systems of oppression. And so how would an understanding of these systems impact the expression of trauma? And more importantly, how can we as facilitators navigate that reality? In or out of prison, women's experiences with interpersonal violence and victimization must be understood within the frame of structural, and I just want to say that, structural disadvantage and intersectional inequality, rather than dismissing it as individual pathology. For me, in other words, intersectionality is systemic in nature and rooted in trauma caused by intersecting systems of oppression. Someone once told me that women of color are already carrying a heavy backpack of various forms of trauma before they even step foot in jail or prison. But why does this matter? Because, for instance, and it's quite important, barriers to health inequities such as trauma-informed services, which a lot of us provide, is also often systemic in nature. One study showed that incarcerated women, correctional staff, and DOC stakeholders and community partners expressed that mental health services in prisons are limited by a lack of internal staff, expertise around sexual assault, and by infrequent opportunities for women to meet with mental health staffers. Because of the nature of the carceral system, as we all know, to perpetuate harm, our role as program providers become even more critical. So I'm just going to move to the next 3 slides about what we can do to support. There are several ways we can begin to use intersectionality as a lens and practice in our work. And I'm sure most of you are already doing this or embedded within your program and the way in which you facilitate. One way we could do this is awareness of trauma resulting from systemic forms of oppression, as I mentioned and as Tai mentioned. Deconstructing of the established and dominant systems of thought and knowledge, for example, while considering that social structures mainly reproduce a masculine view of the world. Another way is our positionality or privilege. Checking yourself out, right? What are your privileges and how do they inform how you provide programming? How do you, for example, facilitate the way you facilitate, perpetuate harm, looking through this lens of intersectionality? While we know the carceral system perpetuate harm, we can also look inward and reflect on how our privilege may also perpetuate harm. Another way we can look at this is through robust programming centered around intersectionality lens. So in addition to just have a deep reflection about who we are as facilitators, both intersectionality and trauma-informed lenses aim to move toward action and systems change. Similar, like I mentioned, similar to our own positionality and privilege, can we look at our curriculum, for example, and programs and see how we can reflect this lens of intersectionality? I think even, I'll just add, even in the way that we time our program, is that such a way where, for example, folks with certain forms of disability, for example, like my son, he has a quite profound disability and cortical vision impairment. It's hard for him to see at night. So when we have programs, for example, for folks that are maybe limited with their vision, it's just something for us to consider these little elements in a program. So like I was saying, inherent in having an intersectionality lens is social justice. For example, health equity, they're linked. Barriers to health equity, such as trauma-informed services, is also often systemic in nature, as I already mentioned. And the last two I'll just speak about is making space. Ask yourself as a program facilitator if you're the right person to take up space or speak on certain issue. Center stories and actions on those with lived experiences. Don't speak for them, don't speak over them. And as Miss Betty had said earlier, right from the very beginning, watch your language. So many of the words we use every day are ableist, exclusionary, and downright offensive to marginalized communities. When was the last time you said, that's so lame, when you were annoyed about something? Consider how someone with physical impairment might hear that. Recognize and correct your use of such terms, accept criticism, and call others out while also calling them in. So yes, intersectionality matters a great deal, as both intersectionality and trauma-informed lenses aim to move toward actions and systems change of incarceration. And all of us here are in that business of creating change. Thank you. And now I will pass it on to our other colleague, Stephanie. Once I stop sharing.
Thank you, Michelle. And Stephanie, I see you're on mute still. There we go.
Oh, this is interesting.
Are the slides stuck, Stephanie?
Yep, I got it.
Sweet, thank you.
Was able to get everybody to review there. Hi, I'm Stephanie Covington. I only do this 100 times a week. I'm the co-director of the Center for Gender and Justice. We provide programming in the women's prisons and the men's prisons here in California, other states, other countries, and a great deal of it's focused on trauma. And our trauma-specific programs we train peer facilitators to lead those. When I think about trauma work, I think about it in 3 levels. And everyone's heard the buzzword, right? Trauma informed. So I've tried to drill down and think about what this really means. That to me, trauma informed is information, what we all need to know. Trauma responsive is what we need to do in terms of taking what we know, putting it into action, our policies, our practices, the environment and culture. So we all know what a challenge that is in a justice system. Trauma specific are the services that we actually provide to people who've experienced trauma. And there are basically three key things I think that all providers and women who are served need to know. Need to understand the process of trauma, including the gender differences, learn about common reactions, and develop coping skills. And so many women, when they're learning about trauma, will say things like post-traumatic stress disorder. There's a name for this. I've felt crazy for years. I didn't know there was a name for it. I've just kept hiding it. So it's really important that these three pieces, I believe, need to be in place. And it's important because trauma impacts thinking, feeling, and behavior. Three things that women are often punished for when they're in a carceral setting. So trauma has an impact on the things that the justice system thinks that they're fixing or working with. And when we can understand the impact of trauma, then it helps us to interact with people in a way that we can really encourage their participation in their own recovery and healing, as well as helping them to help others. And we've certainly found that by having peer facilitators doing trauma-specific work in the institutions, it's been very impactful. So let's look quickly at what the process of trauma actually is. There's a traumatic event. Well, I'm going to be talking on the individual level, but you've heard already that you have to situate this in the larger social structure of our society, the historical, cultural trauma, the intersectionality. But if we look at it on an individual level, trauma is an event that overwhelms someone's capacity to cope physically and psychologically. And the first reaction to that is where we hear the fight, flight, freeze response. And there are changes that happen in the body. There can be physical numbing, psychological numbing, and the person ends up with a sensitized nervous system. And then there's some kind of psychological or physical distress. It can be a current stressor, such as the experience of being arrested, coming into a prison or a jail for the first time. It can be it's getting a phone call from family that's distressing. So it can be a current stressor, or it can be a reminder of the trauma, what we call a trigger or an activator, a sight, a sound, a smell, something that pushes the woman back in time, and she's flooded by the feelings of what happened when the traumatic event itself occurred. And the criminal justice system is filled with potential triggers: restraint, handcuffs, isolation, the pat and cavity searches, loud noises, the yelling, the threats, all the things that just go on a daily basis. And you can think about, as we've heard, the majority of women, really, I haven't ever met an incarcerated woman that didn't have a traumatic experience before she came to prison. But imagine the amount of sexual abuse that women have often experienced prior to incarceration, and then some of the things that happen inside the prison and how that can be a trigger or an activator. How do people respond to this? Well, in the work that we do, we think about the inner self, where our thoughts, feelings, values, and beliefs. The inner self can be impacted so that their mental or emotional responses. The external self is our behavior in our relationships, and often their reactions externally in the body and in behavior. So we can see on the slide on the right there, you can see some of the typical things that are responses to trauma, what I call the retreat responses, which are the mental health responses, isolation, dissociation, which is the mind-body split. And when you're running groups or you're working with the women, I'm sure you've had the experience of speaking to a woman and it looks like she's not there. There's something, very often she's dissociated. A lot of women do their time in a very dissociated state. It's a way to survive inside. The depression, the anxiety. There's the harmful behavior to self. This is where I put the substance use disorders, the eating disorders, the deliberate self-harm, which we see more in women's prisons and men's prison, and the suicidal actions. harmful behavior to others, aggression, violence, rages, and the physical health issues. And the difficulty is that we have many services that are provided to people in the system where the mental health services aren't thinking about trauma. They're not through the lens of trauma, the substance use treatment, the anger management programs. All of these things need to be provided, these services, through the lens of trauma. I mentioned those. As I said before, post-traumatic stress disorder is a common response to trauma. Men actually experience more physical violence. Women actually have more post-traumatic stress disorder. And so that's that re-experiencing the trauma through nightmares and flashbacks, the numbing, the avoiding, the hyperarousal, and a lot of negative thinking. When we look at addiction, this is very linked to trauma. Some people begin to use substances as a way to deal with trauma, and their solution becomes a problem. People are at greater risk of harm when they're under the influence, both of experiencing harm or perpetrating harm. Traditional substance use disorder didn't deal with trauma. The new programming that's come into CDCR is actually helping women recover and helping men recover, those programs which also have a trauma piece in them. But it's taken a long time to get that there. We've criminalized the disease of addiction. Many women are in jails and prisons because of their relationship to alcohol and other drugs. And we know long-term recovery is impeded by unresolved trauma. The kinds of feelings, when you're working with women, I think if you think about a continuum, and often trauma survivors are at either end of that continuum, there can be a lot of feelings that are connected to having a trauma history. And the same with behaviors. Again, continuum of behavior, often we see things more on the ends of the continuum. And so when we begin to look at how people are thinking and feeling and behaving through the lens of trauma, we begin to have a deeper understanding of what they may be struggling with. And I think with trauma, we have to have a gender lens. And I think that's been made very clear earlier in the presentations. And so let me just tell you quickly one other piece about how to look at this. If we look over the course of the lifespan, both boys and girls are at risk, and greatest risk from family members and the people they know. Even though families continue to tell their children, don't take candy from a stranger, they should be saying, watch out for Uncle Bob. If we look at adolescence for young men, they're at greatest risk from people who dislike them or hate them, police or their peers. If they're gay, a young man of color, a gang member, or transitioning, it's the people who dislike them that very often create the harm. But for a young woman, her greatest risk for harm is in her relationships, from the person to whom she's saying, I love you. On the adult level, a man serves in the military, his greatest risk of harm is from the enemy. If he lives in the free world, his greatest risk for harm is being a victim of crime committed by a stranger. Woman in the military, greatest risk for harm from the people she's serving with. If she's living in the free world in our communities, greatest risk for harm in her relationships. It's a very, very different look. And has been said before, the LGBTQ, gender non-conforming population are at the highest risk for harm, both not only inside in the prisons and jails, but in our communities. So we have to consider gender when we're thinking about trauma. So I'm going to pass this to, let's see, Trivia, right?
Yes, yes. Hi, my name is Taridia, and I would like to speak to you guys from the perspective of being formerly incarcerated. I did almost 23 years. So I come from both the perspective of the facilitator and the formerly incarcerated. I spent over 20 years taking those groups. I would like to help you guys, to let you guys know that being in prison itself is traumatizing, especially if you're a woman separated from your children. Stephanie spoke on some triggers, they were so true. but there's so many more different triggers, and they keep them in a constant hypervigilant mode. Stuff going on in the room, the yard, fights breaking out, staff tripping, drug deals, COs acting out, power tripping. It's just you're in this constant hypervigilant mode of fear and trauma and just being just nervous all the time. And so when they reach the groups, they're already experiencing trauma due to that hypervigilance. So when you're asking them to open themselves up to past trauma, you're putting them at the risk of being re-traumatized if it's not handled correctly. I will give you guys the perfect example of a situation that was not handled correctly. I was in a group, and the facilitator, and not intentionally being negative, but he implied that to all of us that we were the reason that we were there. It was our choices. It was our fault. That's why we're there. And unfortunately, that was very triggering to one individual woman, because for a lot of people, that's true. But for some people, that's not true. And everybody's history is different. So you don't know what their history is and what they've been through. So this particular lady took it very personal. She screamed, I mean, literally just screamed and ran out the room. And we're like, what just happened, you know? And what he didn't realize was that this particular lady, she had actually did not commit the crime. Her husband was brutally abusive, and he raped her and sodomized her and beat her, and then the abuse started bleeding out to the children. So he started abusing the children. At one point, he very nonchalantly decided to rape his daughter. That's when his wife tried to intervene. The teenage daughter and the wife were struggling back and forth. And in the process, he fell and hit his head on a brick or something, and he died. During that struggle, it was him and the daughter was the one that actually pushed him off. And long story short, it really wasn't her fault, and she didn't tell the part that the daughter played at all. So they convicted her of murder when really it was just self-defense. So she was already going through some stuff in her room and going through some stuff with her daughter at home. And so what he said just triggered her. And she wound up getting into a big thing with some fellow incarcerated women and a CO, and they put her on suicide watch and labeled her 5150. So because the words were carelessly spoken, not maliciously, but carelessly spoken, it created a situation where she experienced more trauma and more trauma simply because she went to this group to get help from her past trauma. So I just really urge everybody to be very mindful that when the women get there, that they're already traumatized, and that when to just tread carefully, have a plan, have goals, and make sure that when the women leave, they leave feeling a little bit more healed. They leave feeling a little bit more empowered and better for having come to the group. Thank you. And I'm passing it to Miss Betty.
Okay, thank you, Tarivia. I just want to bring up something that I don't think people really often think of, unless, even if you're inside. What I know to be true is that trauma hits the body and it has to be held somehow. Trauma has to be held by the body. So what does that look like? For women inside, what does that look like? It looks like high blood pressure, diabetes. It even looks like cancer. It comes through many ways in the body. Personal experience. I was in the clinic one day and everybody in there had high blood pressure. Everybody literally had high blood pressure. Some had diabetes also. So the thing is, if on my way to the clinic, if you had asked me, how you doing? I would have said, I'm fine. How you doing? But when you plug up to the machine, I'm at stroke level. My blood pressure is so high, I am almost at stroke level where they would not even allow me to leave the clinic until it comes down. So that's to say that trauma becomes normal. And you can't even identify it because you wear it every single hour of every single day. You come from the doors opening like rapid gunfire, and you jumping up every day till just not even, hearing it like an alarm clock. So trauma becomes normalized, and only the body shows how it is being internalized. And so that's just some little information to know when we go in and see these people and see them maybe in a different way. And just don't accept, I'm fine, I'm good. Look a little closer. Look into their eyes. What is their body saying? So that we can actually see where they are and not just hear what they say. Check. And I'm passing it to Caitlin.
Me, yep.
I think
Thank you so much, Miss Betty. Again, Caitlin with the TPW, just wanted to share that to make people feel shame or to make people feel bad, even inadvertently, about the way that they've survived trauma has the opposite impact of healing. So for example, if someone is dissociated, snap out of it, right? That sort of thing. That is counterproductive to really allowing that person to open. What we need to do is honor those survival shapes, what we can call like trauma shaping or a survival shape. Honor that people freeze, honor that people dissociate or fight or flee, as a step towards inviting them into a space where they have some other options when they're under pressure. The goal being that under pressure, we really want people to have more options than just the trauma options, the fight, flight, freeze, for example, to be able to respond. But to start, we have to say, good job keeping yourself safe all these years. Really good job protecting yourself and your family all these years. We see how hard you've been working all these years. Really smart of you to do that. Thank you for getting yourself this far. So just want to say that it's important to honor those survival shapes that trauma produces for folks. I'm going to pass it to Rabia.
Hello. This time I would like to talk about the potential risks and the harms of mishandling trauma. Because remember, as last time I spoke on it, when they arrive there, they're already in a state of hypervigilance and experiencing great trauma. Then you're asking them to reopen themselves to the past trauma. So they're very vulnerable. So there is a great risk for serious consequences, sometimes self-harm or even suicide. I want to give you another example, and these are real life true stories so that you guys can see what happens on the other side when you guys are gone, if it's not handled correctly, excuse me. There was a young lady, and she only had 2 years. She was in a life where she only had 2 years left, and she had been going through a lot of trauma in her room, being bullied, mistreated, even molested, tried to get help. Officers didn't care. She was very vulnerable, and she was at a point of thinking about suicide. She was struggling with suicide, and we was in a group the day of, early that morning, and we did a group, and the facilitator said something, and it triggered her. And she got mad and got up and just left. And when I seen her later, she looked happy, she looked fine, but she was really triggered. So later that day, later at dinner time, unknowingly to everybody else, because she looked fine, she had made a suicide pact with another friend who lived in a separate building. So at dinner time, they decided to hang themselves from the bathroom doors, 2 separate people in 2 separate buildings at the same time. Her friend's roommate came back because she had forgot her ID, and her roommate found her. So the yard went down for 2 hours while they fought to save the lady's life. Thank God they were successful. But unfortunately for her, she was left hanging for 2 hours, so she passed away. I brought that up to say this, that when you trigger somebody, if we trigger somebody, knowingly or unknowingly, you never know what the consequences are or how vulnerable they are already when they get to that group and you're asking them to open themselves up even more. Unfortunately for her, the consequences were deadly. And so I pray that when you speak and you help these women, that you remember that everybody has their own story and that you don't know what they've experienced by the time they got there. So just speak with empathy. I encourage you to speak with love and compassion, and just to be very mindful. Also, I hope that when you realize that they're not okay, so when you ask everybody how they're doing and they say they're okay, just know they're not okay. And I pray that you guys are able to recognize that when they're not okay and spend that extra time with them so that when they leave centered and calm and in a good place. And I would like to pass it to Miss Betty. Thank you, guys.
Miss Betty, you're on mute.
Okay, that's my claim to fame, y'all. I'm a mute queen. Okay, that's what I do. Okay, but I just want to say that, okay, so what can we do to lessen the trauma for the people that we serve as facilitators? What can we do? Does it work? What are the possibilities? What I know to be true is that hurt people hurt people. What I also know to be true is healing people, help people. Whatever you have is what you're going to pass on. So if I have hurt, that's what I'm going to pass on. If I have healing, that's what I'm going to pass on. So how do we get to the healing? Is it even worth it? Is restorative justice workable? Does it work for everyone? My answer to that is it depends on how we hold them. I have seen it work for a lot of people who have been able to get past the mirror. The hardest part in embracing the trauma that you have been through, because what we're told is that if we have trauma in our lives, we're the cause of it. It's our fault. So maybe the beginning is that mirror, because you have to get through that mirror to say, I'm okay and I deserve healing. And that takes the efforts of two people. That takes the effort of the facilitators who hold them in classes and groups. And it also takes lived experience folk to give them the other component of that. So together, we can hold them through that mirror. We can be the container for them in that mirror as they see that healing works. Because, you know, when you get a new toy, you want to show everybody your new toy. When you get a new car, you want everybody to see your new car. And this healing is the same thing. When you get it, you want to share it. You know, because it's like, wow, is this possible? Is this possible? So what's possible is to continue to have these spaces with empathy, as everyone else has said, to acknowledge it. I wrote down a couple of notes. It's like, we've talked about intersectionality. We've talked about response to trauma. The system is not trauma management. They are people management. That's all they're trying to do, is manage the people, get everybody to stay in line and have as little problems as possible with them and be able to write something down that says they did something. So just holding that mirror gently, restorative justice does work. And if you can get one person through that mirror that says, you're not bad, what you did is what you did, not who you are. If we can get folk to acknowledge that it's what you did, it's not who you are redeemable, then restorative justice will work. And the more people that we can get it to work for, they're going to bring in the next one. And they're going to bring in the next one, and so on and so on and so on. And then it's going to be like a big thing. Just like every other big thing, it starts with one. So if you can reach one, and they reach two, and so on and so on and so on, we've absolutely started restorative justice to work. And we've absolutely started to change not only their lives, but we started to change community lives. Because when they go home and exhibit that and bring that to their family members, it just grows and it grows and it grows, just like when you throw that pebble in the water and the ripple effects. This is what restorative justice can be. And this is what it can look like. And it can start with us. And it can start with us with just being conscious and intentional about our consciousness. So if we just do that, that's all I have. I just really believe that we do have the power for change, and we can do it starting in the classes that we do, and just even be looking at people differently. Our language will change our insight. So I thank you so much for just showing up for this. And now I'm going to pass it to Caitlin.
Thank you, Miss Betty, again so much for sharing and for your experience. We are about to move into very brief breakout rooms to get you all talking to each other for about 4 minutes. When we come back, we're going to be doing a skills refresher and talk about vicarious trauma. So please be sure to come back after the breakout rooms. What the breakout room's purpose is really thinking about the importance of being aware of your own body and how you are showing up when you are facilitating. And to get into that, we're going to ask 2 questions. What does trauma mean to you? And how have you felt trauma in your body before? Carly's going to has already done it, pasted those 2 questions into the chat so that when we send you into your breakout rooms, you can refer to them. You're going to be in breakout rooms of 3 people. You'll have about a minute each to share. We know you are facilitators and that we are giving you a challenging task to keep within that period of time, but we believe in you as well. So with that, let's break out into these rooms of 3 and we'll be back with you in about 4 minutes. I want to just invite 1 or 2 people to unmute themselves and share a little bit about their experience in their very brief breakout room. Anyone willing to unmute themselves?
I'll go. Anika
Great.
Flag. Yeah, we were all kind of, it was really quick. So we were all like on the same page in a sense of what trauma was without doing like maybe the textbook definition, more or less like how it was, like we experience it. It could be something that's emotional or psychological, but it's always like felt in the body. Like it's seen that way. Like I could be sitting crying, but your body's going to feel the shakes or the shutting down or different things. And, we all kind of looked at it as basically whatever takes you, I said from your wholeness, from where you were, like when you were regularly going to work, going to school, your regular activities, participating with family and friends, when you're no longer doing those. It's like when you pull away. It's kind of when you like shelter yourself in a sense, And overall, I think we all kind of felt like, I say back in the day, people always looked at like you have a problem. And I know what said earlier, what's wrong with you versus what are you feeling or what's going on for you in your body, how you're feeling. And, it's just good that we all kind of are seeing that, like we know what we've experienced and we know what it is and how we can work through it. So like she said earlier that, healing people help heal others. So that's from our group.
Thank you so much. All right. All right, folks, thank you for coming back after breakout rooms. I know it's a tall order, but we are going to head in now to our last 25 minutes or so of this training. And I'm going to pass to Stephanie to do kind of a skills refresher on in-prison facilitation. And Stephanie, you are up. For her to get her slides up. There we go. And I think you know this, Stephanie, but you're still on mute.
My screen does not want to share. Let's see. Can you see it?
Yeah, we see it. It's okay the way it is, I think, with the slides on the side. If it doesn't go full
Yeah,
screen, I think
it won't
that's
come
okay.
up for whatever reason.
Okay, let's.
Is it big enough that you can see it?
Yeah, I think so. The slide 16 right now is mostly blank, but we can see it on the edge. Let's see.
Aha.
There we go.
We can see it.
Perfect.
Oh my God, so sorry. Well,
No problem.
when we're on a time limit too. So as I said earlier, we talk about trauma informed as information, but then it's what can we do with this? And that's where the trauma responsive comes in, which I think is why all of us are on this call. And it really means we take into account what a person is thinking, feeling, behaving, and how trauma has impacted them. We've heard about triggering, trying to avoid triggers, re-traumatizing. I think it's important to understand that the trauma survivor actually never knows where a trigger is going to come from. And someone can be in a healing process for 5 or 10 years and there'll be a trigger. So that's why it's so important we teach people coping skills so that they can learn to manage their trauma symptoms. And that way they can benefit from whatever programming we're doing. And it's really important that we look at our policies and our practices and what we've been doing in our groups. And there are 5 core values. And this comes from the work of Roger Fallett and Maxine Harris, who developed these about 20 years ago when they began to look at social services across the board, saying, we need to be providing services differently. Safety, trustworthiness, choice, collaboration, and empowerment. And think about how difficult it is to get that into a carceral setting. But we can do it in our groups. Even if the larger system isn't doing it, we can provide this in whatever programming we're providing. So let me give you some examples. Safety. If we're running groups, we help the group to create some group agreements. And we have structure to the group, so there's a sense of predictability of what's happening in group. So, and I'm going to give you quotes from things people have said in trauma groups that they've done inside CDCR. This person said, I appreciate the way the facilitators made me feel. These are the peer facilitators. It felt like being part of a loving family, safe, valued, special. Trustworthiness. We know one of the major challenges that women talk about in prison is the inconsistency, is you never know what you're expected to do because it changes depending on what staff is there and how they enforce the rules. So we want people to have a sense of trustworthiness through us. And this happens with the consistency of the facilitator and the person providing the program does what they say they're going to do. So this person said, I'm very grateful for the time the facilitators gave to teach a very awesome program for trauma. They were insightful, caring, and sincere. They never missed a session and they were never late. I can trust you. Choice, another challenge in a correctional setting. What choices are the women given? But we can give them choice about joining our program. We can give them choice about how much they share. This person said, I liked a lot about it. One thing that was good, we got to choose this group and then choose how much to share about ourselves and learn from each other. I do not believe in mandated trauma services. I think that's a mistake. People need to be able to choose. Collaboration. Does it feel like we're a team in whatever it is programming we're providing? And this is how the program provider positions themselves. This person said it felt like the facilitators were really there for us and with us. They never acted as though they were above us. It really shows they want to help us to change. And empowerment. And this becomes, I think, one of the key pieces that I said earlier about what needs to happen in terms of staff and the women receiving services is skill building. Learning grounding tools, learning ways to self-soothe, particularly people who are used to using alcohol and other drugs as their coping mechanism. What are the tools we can be teaching? And this person said, I just want to thank you for helping me build my foundation and giving me some tools to stand strong by the new change in my life. So there are things we can do inside a carceral setting, which I think we all would agree. If you can provide something of value there, you can provide something of value anywhere. There's no place where it's more needed. I'm going to share with you this, and this will also be in your resource packet. And it's what I call a brief conversation. Because I've learned years ago the way I was trained, if you were going to work with a trauma survivor, you'd work with them multiple times a week for multiple years. And guess who got that service? I think we can make a difference in 10 minutes. And I think how we talk to people, I think being able to say to someone, you know, a lot of the women we work with have had really difficult life experiences. You know, a lot of them have had physical abuse or sexual abuse that's really connected to the problems they're struggling with today. I don't know if it's true about you or not. I don't know if you want to talk about that or not. But I also know that when people come here, wherever it is, often something new is anxiety producing. And so it's really important to have some coping skills, and I can show you how to do some things. I can practice them with you, or I can give you some information. And so we're going to give you, the next group is going to give you some idea of what these skills would look like, okay? So I'll stop sharing. And who's going to be, oh, Tai, you're going to do the first one, right?
I think Michelle's up for her.
Oh,
We're gonna-
okay. I've
Yep.
got a whole list.
No problem, Michelle.
Thank you. At IGP, this is meditation and breathing exercises as part of our culture. And I wanted to share a breath focus technique with you all. And it uses imagery or focus words and phrases. I invite you to choose a focus word that makes you smile, feel relaxed, or simply neutral to think about. It could be the word peace, let go, or relax. So just find yourself in a comfortable space on your chair. Bring awareness to your breath without trying too hard, without trying to change the way you're breathing. Just be there. So alternate between normal and deep breaths a few times. Notice any differences between the two. And notice how your abdomen expands with deep inhalations. You can even put your hand on your belly, or good bellies. Notice how shallow breathing feels compared to deep breathing. Practice your deep breathing a few times. Now I invite you to place one hand below your belly button, keeping your belly relaxed, and notice how it rises with each inhalation and falls with each exhalation. And let out a loud sigh with each exhale. Begin to practice a breath focus by combining this deep breathing with imagery and a focus word or phrase that I shared earlier, or whatever word or images you have in your mind. And you can imagine that the air you inhale bring waves of peace and calm throughout your body. And mentally say the mantra, inhaling peace and calm. Imagine that the air you exhale washes away tension and anxiety. And you can say to yourself, exhaling tension and anxiety. Thank you all.
Now, there's a little fun one, but it is really a good one. And it's called Wiggles. And I think that grounding, you really need to like have your feet firmly on the ground. However comfortable that is for you, but just be intentional about feeling your feet on the ground. And Wiggles is very easy and it's very fun. First, everybody go like this. Everybody can do this with me. Everybody, come on, do the wiggles, do the wiggles. Okay, now take your index finger from your other hand and just like, you know how when we used to like do finger paintings and we draw our hands and then we do the turkey? Okay, that's what we're gonna do. So you're just gonna go in and out and in and out and just feel that. Just feel that. Who knew that was this calming? Just feel it. Now take the other hand and do the same. Now you can feel these sensations down your legs to your feet. And when you really get into it and close your eyes, you can feel it all over your body. So you can do this anytime you like. You can give it to others to do anytime they're like. It's absolutely a stress doer. This will bring your stress down. It is really good immediately. And there you have it. Do the wiggles, do the wiggles, do the wiggles. Everybody, I want to see it. Do the wiggles. Okay, who knew? Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Betty. Thanks for those examples of interactive exercises that you can use with your team or inside. I'm going to pass back to Stephanie to get into the issue of vicarious trauma. We look good.
Can you see the thing, the screen?
I see all of us.
You don't see the
There.
screen yet,
I,
right?
I see, if you
It looks
click,
like you shared your whole desktop screen, so you can stop sharing and then it will give you, when you start sharing again, it'll give you options and then you press on the specific PowerPoint, if that makes
I think
sense.
that option, yeah.
This is fascinating.
I thought it was a cute screenshot of us all, though.
And it looks good.
Let's try this one. What are you seeing now? You still see us?
Yes.
That's what I'm
Got a
seeing.
message from one of the participants. Oops, sorry, Stephanie, go ahead.
Oh,
That's
try
so
the
cool.
one.
There you go.
Yeah.
What are you seeing now?
We see the big 5 things slide on the left and then understanding that looks like maybe the next slide on the top right.
Oh, so we're on my other screen. How strange. Well, we're going to do it this way from my other slide. Okay. I love this. There's a great quote here. The expectation we can be immersed in suffering and lost daily and not be touched by it is as unrealistic as expecting to be able to walk on water without getting wet. In other words, because of the work you're doing, your risk of being impacted by it. And this has a variety of names: vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue, secondary PTSD, or burnout. And vicarious trauma is when you see and hear the stories from the women. It impacts us, right? You can't not be impacted by it. Compassion fatigue is where you're at that place in your work where you think, I can't hear one more story. I can't respond to any more of this. And what happens is then we become detached. When we look at post-traumatic stress disorder, we can have secondary PTSD where we're actually experiencing avoidance and the hypervigilance and the nightmares and the intrusive thoughts. And burnout is where you just feel fried and you dread going to work, you feel frustrated, you don't really care about it anymore. There's this other piece of burnout that comes from some work of my colleague Sandy Bloom, who talks about burnout happens to people who are struggling with moral or ethical dilemmas at work. And if there's any place where any of us experience, I know, moral or ethical dilemmas, it's working in a correctional setting where you're expected and at times have to do things that are contrary to your value system. And so that also can have an impact on us. So these 5 core values that I gave you earlier about safety, choice, trustworthiness, collaboration, empowerment are the same values that have to be in place for people who work in the system. And so it's really important that the agencies you work for think about how to put these values in place for all of you, because I don't see it happening in CDCR. This is one of the tools that I suggest for people who are working in stressful environments. Is try to find 30 seconds in the morning and in the afternoon so that you do this twice a day. You do some deep breathing. You look at something beautiful and you smile at another person. And if you do that while you're working inside twice a day, it'll help change things in you, right? So there's value in doing that. Are we coming to the end? I can't remember what the, I want to share 2 things with you as we end. One is what we've learned, that when places become trauma informed and trauma responsive, organizations and facilities become safer, people feel safer, jobs become easier, and programming becomes more effective. But I want to leave you with this quote. The late Archbishop Desmond Tutu from South Africa, a number of years ago, was celebrating 25 years of being a peace advocate, and he decided he would conduct a mass. He wanted to do it in the place that he carried the most pain, and he chose a women's prison. And he said, there's no place on earth that carries more pain than a women's prison. I think it's important for us to think about that as we do our work. So thank you for letting me be with you today.
Thank you, Stephanie. All right, folks, we are coming to the end of the refresher course today. We're going to share in the chat, Carly's going to share a 100-page resource guide that we put together. It has some interesting chapters. And Stephanie, if you don't mind stopping your share.
Yep,
you have
I'm
the
looking
moment.
for the button on my screen.
Oh yeah. Carly's going to share in the chat a big file of resources. There it is now that y'all can access. It includes some studies. It includes the Berkeley Dictionary and also the slides from today's presentation. And so feel free to use those, share those how you will. I want to drop in the chat the evaluation that we're going to ask for y'all to click into while we're still here together and get some feedback from you on how today's presentation went. I want to say that a few minutes ago, I got a private message from someone in this saying that they were feeling like they were holding back tears based on the content that we're going over and the presentation. I just really want to honor that and say, you know, to take good care of yourselves this afternoon, and that we acknowledge that this is really tough content. And so having a reaction to it makes a whole lot of sense. And I want to share that if anyone here is not yet a TPW member and you're interested in joining the TPW either in New York or in California, I'm going to drop my email address into the chat. Also, if you just want more information, feel free to contact me. And then, Carly, are you able to bring up that once you put the Google survey in, can you bring up the last, or the donate link rather? So I wanted to also make a quick pitch for the TPW. If you want to continue to support programming like this and support our advocacy, trying to bring more healing programs into California and New York prisons, we are absolutely grateful for any kind of contribution that you're able to make. And when you fill out the survey, we hope that you'll add some content about if you want a more advanced training. You know, we kind of thought of this as the 101. Some people having trouble opening the survey. We'll figure it out. And so that we can plan to have a more advanced training for folks, if that's something that people want. So I think with that, we're gonna open up for any comments before we close. I want to thank the panelists again and Carly, and we'll try to get you all a link that that works for everybody. With that, anyone have any final comments?
I have
Mary
a
Lou?
question.
Yes, I'll take a question and then I'll go to Mary Lou.
Okay. You said there was a 100-page document that you're going to be sending out. Is that going to be emailed to us? And how do you know who, how would you know who to send it to?
So we dropped it in the Zoom chat. So you should
Oh, I
be
missed
able
it
to,
then.
yeah, no problem. You should be able to click it and download it from the Zoom chat. But we can also send a follow-up email to everyone who attended this training. Once we have the recording of this training up, we can send that with the resource list as well. And we have your emails because you registered. So we got you.
Okay, thank
Mary,
you. I
great.
downloaded it.
Okay, perfect. Mary Lou, you're on mute.
I'm being like Betty. Oh, no, I just want to say thank you. First of all, thank you to everyone for this. This is wonderful. And I just wanted to share just a little piece of, you know, how we say that our home is our castle because we do so much work. There's a little thing that I was taught how to do. And all you do is get a cup of water and you say your own little prayer over it, whatever it is for yourself. And then you just get the water and you sprinkle from left to right in a circle around yourself in front of your front door. Okay. And you say, let only those with good spirits enter. So, so what you're doing there is you're providing a shield for yourself that no negativity comes from outside into your home, so that your home is your castle and that you are safe when you're home. It's just a little thing that we were taught how to do. It's very simple. And also on your way out the door, that we've all put on a shawl on before, at least most women have, that you put on your shawl of shield as you're walking out the door, because that's your protector from when you're out going outwards and then when you come home. The two different little things that you can do just to protect yourself from the negative energies that are always ready to attack. I just wanted to share that.
Thank you so much, Mary Lou. I see your hand, Trivia. We're just about out of time. Would you like to chime in? Oh, you're on mute.
Can I say something really quick?
Yeah.
Okay, so I just want to say, ladies and gentlemen, that in my 23 years, I've seen a lot of negative things, but I also seen a lot of good come from trauma training and healing. And I just want to encourage you guys to continue doing what you're doing. You guys are a blessing. I've seen so many lives change, mine included. So God bless you and continue doing a great job that you guys are doing. You are appreciated.
Wonderful. On that note, we're going to take one final breath and a loud sigh together. Feel free to unmute yourselves. Big breath in and sigh out. Thank you, everyone, for the work that you do in the world. We appreciate you, and we hope to see you back here again.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.